Hello and welcome back to the Wander Women's Collective podcast. I'm your host, Gracie Hins, and today we have Cloe Coscoy, a World Cup climber, on the podcast. Chloe and I met last year in Salt Lake, and it's just been so fun getting to follow along on her journey. This summer she spent quite a bit of time following the Olympics, and she just got second at nationals in the US, and she's also just been navigating how to, live in your 20s, be a competitive climber, have a job, and everything that goes along with that. So I hope you enjoy this podcast. It was such a fun conversation, and I'm really just excited to share it with everyone.
Do you want to just give a little introduction of who you are, what you're doing, what you spend your time on?
I'm Cloe Coscoy. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have two French parents and a younger brother, so that was a big part of my kind of upbringing, was kind of going to France a lot, and that's kind of was a big part of my childhood, but also started climbing when I was 13, and that kind of straight away became a huge part of my life. And when I was 18, 19, when I graduated high school, I moved to Salt Lake to pursue competition climbing a little more seriously and try and balance that with school and some work stuff as well. And right now I finished my bachelor's. I did the bachelor's in economics, and I've been competing the last few years, and I decided that I wanted to kind of focus on that work career development piece a little more. And so I'm currently in Basel, Switzerland. I've been here since June, and I'll be here until December, doing an internship at a pharmaceutical company. So that's still competing and training a lot also. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at right now.
When you first got into climbing, I don't feel like I've heard this story. Was it you that initially was okay, I want to go try this climbing thing, or was it your parents that kind of got you into it?
Yeah, so my parents actually climbed before I was born.
Okay.
Um, so they met in France, and they used to go climbing in France. And then when they moved to the States and they had my brother and I, they just completely stopped climbing. And so I always kind of knew what climbing was, and my dad had taken me to the climbing gym a few times growing up, maybe every 6 months or so he would take my brother and I. And then when I was 12 or 13, this gym called Bridges opened up really close to my house, and my parents were like, oh, maybe it would be fun if we tried kind of going there as a family thing, and we could start climbing a little bit. And so we all started going, and I was there every day, all the time, joined the climbing team really, really quickly, and yeah, never left.
I don't think I realized that there was that family portion of it for you. When you were in high school, what was kind of your level of competition then? Because I know that there's all of the youth national stuff that can happen in high school, and getting involved with that, and then taking that decision of okay, I'm actually pretty good at this. I want to keep pursuing this past just high school.
When I started in youth, I did just well enough that I was kind of in the realm of and pretty close to being able to do international competitions in youth, but wasn't quite there yet. And so I had a few more years in youth to kind of for that to keep me motivated. And then as soon as I started competing in open, I was also competing in youth, so kind of had that. And then pretty quickly I started to be in the same position in open, where I wasn't quite good enough to compete internationally in World Cups, but it was definitely within reach, and it felt attainable if I just got that little bit better. And so I think that setup, I feel really helped me be pretty motivated and just want to compete more and get better all the time.
Well, and it's when that international competition is on the table too, I feel like there's nobody that wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool, especially when you're young. I think the thought of getting to travel somewhere with all your friends and go do the thing that you love, you're that's just insane. I can't believe that's a thing that I could potentially do. And it's pretty easy to work hard for that. And I think as I've gotten older, that excitement is still a big part of it. And then there's also a lot more, I think, that goes into thinking about like wanting to have good results and like why do you compete, and you have to answer a lot more questions for yourself, I think. But when you're young, you're like, wow, that would be just insane to go do that.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, yeah, no, exactly like what you're saying. Like, it's kind of the perfect age to be able to like dip your toe in the water of like, what does this look like? At that point, were you thinking, okay, this is something I want to keep doing for a while? Or was it kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna see where this wave takes me and then like we'll figure it out as we go kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say, well, it's kind of funny because if I like take a step back, I did a lot of different sports growing up. Like I swam for a little bit, and I would like run cross country and track in middle school. And then before that, like I didn't play many organized team sports like outside of school, but in school I was always like just playing all types of sports and definitely super athletic, and I liked to kind of compete, but I never stuck with anything more than a few years. Like when I started climbing, I never thought that it would be something that I would like necessarily do forever. And then it kind of started to get to that point where it was like the longest I had done any other sport was swimming, and I was on a swim team for like 3 years, and then kind of got to a point where like I've been climbing for 4 years and I'm definitely not about to stop climbing. And so I think like pretty quickly I started to feel like, okay, there's something like different about climbing where like I'm not about to give it up for something else. Like I'm sticking with this one.
And then, okay, so then you finish up high school and
Yeah,
then you're looking at college and you decide on Utah.
COVID.
COVID?
Yeah.
Wait, but you
Yeah.
still had, were you in person at all before COVID hit?
So, yeah, so I guess the like kind of COVID backstory is important for school. For me, I started at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley in spring of 2020. So January 2020 in person at
Okay.
Berkeley, living at home. And I did 2 months of classes at Berkeley. And then the pandemic hit, and it was all a whole big mess. But I actually, during that time when the pandemic hit, I was home for a few months, and then I moved to Salt Lake because the training center there was kind of the only place we could climb. Like the people on the national team could go there and climb. So I was in Salt Lake, and then I was still doing online school at Berkeley for like a year and a half. And then once it started to look like we were going to go back in person, that's when I transferred to school in Salt Lake.
Yeah, I feel like even being like kind of a bit of an outsider from like the US training scene, like it just seems like you guys are such a close-knit community of people, like especially kind of like our age. You guys were all competing together before you kind of like joined the US team, or like it just seems like such a cool close-knit
Yeah,
community. So like how was it going from like not being with that to then, okay, wow, we're all in the same spot, really able to like feed into, like the stoke of like what we can do and like where we can take this.
definitely. I think, I mean, like you said, it was pretty unique because I think that my like 4 or 5 year group generation kind of was the first year where we had like a lot of consistent climbing competitions happening all over the US, like mostly different national cups through USA Climbing, but also some like cash comps that were happening in gyms sort of all over. And so we would all travel to those events at like 15, 16, 17 years old and just stay. Like our parents wouldn't really come, so it was usually all of us staying together in like an Airbnb, and we would all hang out and do the competition. And then it wasn't unusual for there to be like a training camp afterwards, and so we would
Yeah.
all stay some extra time and train together. And so I think we all got really close from just growing up like that. And then once I had the opportunity to move to Salt Lake, it was with Quinn Mason, who's like a super good friend of mine who I grew up competing with. So the two of us went together to Salt Lake to train, and we kind of roped in a couple other friends to come join us. And and come train as well. And we were it was 4 of us at the time staying in a house in Salt Lake. It was initially supposed to be just a few months, and like after a few months, it became pretty clear that like nobody was ready to leave. That was like out of the question. It's like, this is what we're doing. We're all going to be here together and train all the time. And we were kind of in that like, COVID is happening, like nothing is real, like we're just like all hanging. It was just the 4 of us living together and climbing all the time, and we were doing school online, but it definitely felt like kind of a background thing. I think the fact that it was all online, like we were all a bit disconnected from that. And it was like we were all, I think, super lucky to have that experience during the pandemic, and it brought us closer. It got everybody kind of psyched on climbing and training and like pushing each other to be better. And we also just had a lot of fun, and we did a lot of dumb stuff along the way, and it was great.
Super quick cut in right here. We were having slight technical difficulties with Wi-Fi, but Chloe was talking about her 2020 World Cup circuit series, and so this is her jumping in and chatting more about it.
2020, so like February of 2020 is when I made the national team in bouldering for the first time. And in theory, that was going to qualify me for the whole World Cup circuit. But then the rest of 2020 happened and everything was canceled for that year. So that was like definitely hard for me, but it was also, again, like it was such a weird time, and I ended up moving to Salt Lake and was training there. And so it was kind of like, since I had never done any World Cups to begin with, it kind of wasn't that crazy. Like I just kind of kept going and kept training and kept like thinking like, okay, I'll just like try and qualify again next year. I did it this year, I can do it again. And then in 2021, I did really poorly in bouldering at like the team selection events. I think I was really nervous going into those events and kind of had that pressure that I was putting on myself, kind of saying like, wow, I made the bouldering team last year and there weren't any comps. If I don't make it this year, that's like super sad. Like that's really annoying. And so that type of mentality is exactly what got me to not make the team that year. But I ended up doing pretty good in lead, so I was able to do some lead World Cups, which was cool. Like it was pretty amazing to be able to just compete in climbing on the international stage. But there's definitely that part of me that was like deep down that I knew I wanted to be specifically on the Boulder World Cup circuit. And so in 2022 is when I was able to do that for the first time and not quite make the team, but I was kind of right under the team, and then I made enough semifinals in the beginning that I ended up getting starts again and again. So I ended up doing the full World Cup circuit, and that was really like exciting and eye-opening season for me.
For people that don't know like what the climbing world circuit looks like, do you want to just like give a little rundown on that? Because I do feel like it's I don't know, I guess I don't follow a lot of traditional sports, but I do feel like it's kind of it's like the World Cup circuit is not short. Like you are all over the world. You're traveling pretty consistently and then like also being expected to compete at this super high level.
I mean, climbing in World Cup starts with being selected on your national team or earning like starts to World Cups. And then in usually around April until June, we have Bouldering World Cups. I think it's typically been around 6 events, but it can change season to season. And that's all over the world. So thinking back, the last few years, we kind of have started in Asia, and we had events in Japan and Korea, and then moving to the US, and then usually finishing the season in Europe. We'll have events in Austria and Italy. And then in June, kind of as soon as the Bouldering World Cups sort of end, is usually the start of the lead climbing World Cups. And that's pretty similar. There will be like around 6 events, which will go until maybe August or September. Most of those are in Europe. And then at the very end of the season, we'll have sometimes another Bouldering World Cup kind of randomly. That's just like later in the year. And maybe a lead World Cup also. And sometimes those are the same event. So like this year they had a lead World Cup and a Boulder World Cup in South Korea at the end of the season. So if you're bouldering, for example, you did your 4 or 5 comps in the spring, early summer, and then there were a few months until your next competition, which is just like the one-off kind of World Cup at the end of the season. So it really depends on the year, but it does require you to be strong and like fit for quite a long time. If you're doing boulder and lead especially, which a lot of athletes do, and with the Olympics kind of requiring you to compete in bouldering and lead, a lot of people have had to do full or almost full bouldering and lead World Cup circuits in the last few years, and that'll kind of give you, like, you'll be competing for almost 6 months straight, like every 2-3 weeks, which is definitely really challenging in terms of training and staying fit, and also just mentally in terms of like staying really sharp and motivated for that whole time.
It just seems like you kind of have to always be on during the year. Like, how did you kind of like deal with that? And was that ever something that like I could totally see that being super fun and like okay for a year or two, but then like after that, like what does that kind of look like? And like how has your mentality around that like shifted or stayed the same over the last couple years?
Yeah, I mean, in the US, the selection for the national team and being able to do World Cups is composed of 2 events. We have our nationals, which is in the fall. It's usually mid-October to mid-November, somewhere in there. And that's just one competition, and that's going to be worth a certain amount of points based on your ranking at that event. And then in mid-March, right before the start of the World Cup season, we'll have another competition. That's the team trial, where that'll make up the rest of the points, and then you're ranked and they decide who makes the team based on your results at those 2 events, which makes the timing is really tricky if you've just come off of a World Cup season. It kind of depends on the athletes. Like, some people will do well enough on the World Cup season that they're able to guarantee themselves a spot on the team for the next year, and so they don't have to go through that whole selection process. So like Brooke and Natalia, for example, like obviously are winning World Cups and podiuming at World Cups, though they don't have to go through the whole nationals and team trials process in order to do World Cups the next year. But for the people who maybe didn't do quite as well in the World Cups, they kind of start from scratch. Maybe they'll have like a few bonus points to kind of help with the selection for the next year. But for the most part, you're kind of starting from zero again at nationals in October, November. And that can definitely be really hard if you were just competing up until August in World Cups. And so I think for a lot of people, they definitely have to make the decision to prioritize certain events and to not go to some events. And I think, like, for me in 2023, that was the first year that I was really like officially on the national team, and I was able to do the bouldering and lead World Cups. And I did the full Boulder World Cup season. It didn't go very well. I wasn't feeling very good for those events. And then kind of immediately after that started going into the lead World Cups and really didn't feel good there either. And at a certain point after the Villars World Cup, which was kind of mid-June, I decided like I really need to take a step back and set my priorities and decide like something needs to change. I wasn't happy with how the season was going. I wasn't happy where with physically where I was at or mentally where I was at. And so decided to kind of take a step back there and say, I'm going to focus on World Championships, which was at the end of the summer that year, and start thinking about next season and training for that. And so that was kind of a hard moment for me because I had to decide not to do the last few lead World Cups because, like, if I was being honest with myself, I really wasn't enjoying that process, and I felt like traveling so much was honestly more harmful than it was good, as much as I do in general like to travel and kind of explore. That it was just like not helpful to my climbing at all. And so at that point I had to really take a step back and prioritize the next season, which definitely helped. Like, I was super happy with that decision and I felt good going into the next competitions. And even though the results at the end of the 2023 season in terms of like the World Championships and that nationals weren't the best, physically and mentally, I was in a much better place than I was kind of mid 2023 World Cup season. So it's really hard. And there aren't that many people, I think, who are in that position where they have to where they're coming off the circuit and have to requalify. But those like requalify for the next season. But those people who are, I think you'll often see kind of their results and even their like energy levels or kind of excitement and motivation around the end of the season going into nationals can be a bit all over the place. Like, I think that's the time where mentally it's really important to know what your goals are and to be like really ready to try and qualify again for the season. And that's definitely hard when you're coming off of a lot of World Cups.
How have you split other parts of life with climbing, and like how have you been able to do that, and like what does that look like for you? Like, you just took a job in Switzerland, which is like pretty cool. And then like what are kind of the other, like what are other people doing too? Like, I know that we've talked about this before, but like it is hard in the climbing world and like athletic world because like you do have people that they're like, I'm gonna just give this all my all, like, you know, I'm gonna put everything in this for the next couple of years, and not have anything else going on. So yeah, thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think like for myself, in the season that I did really well, the best season that I've had on the World Cup circuit was my first bouldering season in 2022, where I made all the semifinals that year, which for a first season was like really exciting. And to me, it was super eye-opening in terms of like, wow, I'm like capable of competing at an international level, and like I belong here, and I'm excited to see what I can do if I can really build on this in the next few seasons. And at that time, I was still doing school. So during all those competitions, I was also in school online. So I was doing that and competing. And then by the end of that year, I graduated. So I finished school. I had my bachelor's in econ, and still I was thinking, okay, like I think I'll use my degree and work for sure at some point, but I'm not really sure what I want to do and what I want to go into. And climbing is going well. I'm excited about that. I'm going to kind of keep doing the climbing thing and see how it goes. And then that next season was the 2023 season, which I just talked about. Like the results were not so good mentally and physically. I was not happy. I had like a concussion that winter, and I feel like that was really affecting me physically. And then like I think when you're only climbing and then climbing isn't going well, like that's mentally tough. Weighs on you a lot. Yeah. It's like if I'm putting all my eggs in this basket and I feel like I'm failing there, then that's like a really hard place to be at. And so I think I was in a bit of a downward spiral there. That was definitely really challenging. And kind of by the next season, I started to think more about my life and what I wanted to do a little bit more long term. And sort of the question that I kept coming back to was like, what is stopping me from like having a good season like I did in 2022? What's different now, and like what do I realistically think needs to happen for me to keep building on my results and keep competing at a high level? And at no point was it ever like I need to only climb and just focus on climbing 24/7. Like, if I was being honest with myself, like realistically, I had time to focus on other things and try to build up my experiences and just, yeah, like opportunities in other spaces. And so I think before I was kind of thinking like, okay, climbing is going well, so I should just climb full time and see what happens. And then it started to be like almost an excuse of like, oh, I'm focusing on climbing right now, so I don't need to focus on all these other things because I'm climbing. And then it started to be like, actually, I think even to climb, I can do other things and climb well. I showed that to myself when I did school. And so that's kind of what pushed me back into like trying to think about what I could do outside of climbing and seek out some opportunities there.
You made the decision to go and take an opportunity in Switzerland. Do you want to speak a little bit on that? And also just like life-wise,
for sure.
Like you had always talked about like, okay, I want to spend at least a little bit of time living in Europe. And so kind of like, yeah, I don't know, just all of the things that go along with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing, like maybe tying back to what I was just saying, for me, like climbing has always been, in my mind, it's what I, like the way I've always framed it is climbing is what I get to do for fun. And at a certain point, I start, like, that doesn't mean it's not hard, and that doesn't mean that, like, it's not, like, a really demanding and sometimes, like, exhausting process. But at the end of the day, I climb because I like it and because I want to climb and it's fun for me. And so at a certain point, I just started feeling like that wasn't enough in terms of what I owed myself. And I think what I owe other people was to kind of put myself out there and kind of take a step into the world and see things that were not climbing related and try to help the world in some way, because I felt like climbing and sports is really like, that's what I'm doing because I want to do it and I like it. And I felt like I had some type of responsibility to like do some, like seek out some career opportunities and like, yeah, work kind of. And I guess I always felt like really privileged to be able to quote unquote just climb for a while. And that's kind of like, that had been kind of playing in my head for a long time of like, I feel like I've been almost taking advantage of this opportunity to just climb, and I need to put myself out there and challenge myself in other ways. And so I started kind of seeking out some opportunities in the economics space, and what I was really interested in was like health economics and kind of thinking about social issues that relate to healthcare. And an opportunity came up to take an internship here in Switzerland for 6 months that's kind of working in the global health department of a pharmaceutical company and trying to think about the ways, like what are different ways we can create sustainable business with low and middle income countries in a way that like fosters development and like really improves access to medication. And that really spoke to the things I had studied and things that I was interested in. So I was super excited to take that opportunity. And also the fact that it was in Switzerland was particularly exciting because, yeah, like you said, I had always wanted to live in Europe for a more extended period of time and kind of see what that is like. I've had a lot of ties to like France growing up, and that was definitely a big part of my identity and my upbringing. And so I wanted to kind of also connect with that piece of me a little more. And so it all came together very nicely with this opportunity here.
What were kind of some of the expectations going into this season, and like how are you excited that, I don't know, I feel like I need to just like hear more about like what the daily life has been. You also just came back to the US and got second at nationals, which is a huge accomplishment. So what has kind of like the balance between work and then also maintaining friendships, and then like also your expectations on being able to climb, and also like sticking with that mentality of like, I get to climb?
So I guess I'll kind of start with the bigger picture. I think partway through the summer, like as I started my internship, I kind of, climbing wise, felt like I had a bit of a decision to make. And that was like, do I kind of want to go, like, this is kind of funny because it doesn't sound like something that I was maybe grappling with like at this point in my life. You're like, you just took an internship. Like, what do you mean these are the questions you're thinking about? But I was kind of thinking about like, do I want to really commit and go all in climbing wise and really see like in the next few years what I can do? Or do I want to kind of take a little bit of a step back, and I'll keep climbing, of course, because it's something that I love, but maybe not put as much pressure on myself to improve, and instead just do these local competitions, which I know are fun for me, and I'll always enjoy doing those. So I can always do that. And, you know, it's okay if I'm not doing international competitions and World Cups. And as much as like, I was kind of in a weird place with that, where I really felt like I was still training and going through the motions, but I had a really conscious decision to make. And to be honest, I think the turning point was when I went to go watch the Olympics. So I went to Paris and I watched climbing there. And I think that whole time I was there, I was kind of really inspired and in awe of the whole thing. And the more I thought about it, the more I kind of felt like the only thing that I could think was like, I just don't want it to be like 10 years from now and for me to be like, I wonder if I really committed and like tried my best climbing wise. Like that, I just like, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, that is like, for me, the worst thing that I could think in my climbing was like, what if? And so that to me was kind of, I think, even though it wasn't that long ago, it was like a pretty big shift in my mindset of like, no, I actually still want to be good, and I still want to get better and try and be the best climber that I can be, and see where that takes me, whether it's, you know, doing more World Cup seasons or like making a World Cup final or whatever it is. That's like still very much like deeply something that drives me. And so I think that was a big one. And kind of going into then like the day-to-day, what was going to be challenging about meeting that expectation of like not having regrets and moving forward with like that kind of ambition was the fact that I'm working 9 to 5, and so that's been like pretty tiring. And so most days I work until like 5:30ish, and then I've been going straight to the gym, which luckily is really close to work, and I'll session from like 6 to 9 or 9:30, like 3 days per week. And then on the weekends, I've been taking the train often like a few hours away, and I'll go to other gyms which have maybe more challenging like comp climbs and stuff, and train there for like 4 or 5 hours a day on the weekends. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a lot, just like having to do that plus also working. But I think the fact that I had that kind of mindset of like, actually, I really want to improve, and I know the work that it's going to take to kind of get where I want to be. It almost made it like easier in the sense that I didn't really give myself any choices in terms of, do I show up to the gym? Do I feel like doing this today? Like, it was never, the last few months for me, it was never a choice that I like gave myself. It was like, no, like, it's same way I have to go to work, or I have to do this and this, like I have to brush my teeth, I have to do my session today, and I have to do it with like effort. And that's like kind of the thinking that has been pretty helpful and driven me to like get up and go to the gym when I'm really tired. The caveat to all of that is the fact that for me, like, this internship is temporary, and so it feels like I'm able to give the work a lot of focus and attention, and I'm really doing my best to like do a good job there and get the most out of that opportunity and hopefully contribute as much as I can. And climbing, like, I think if that were something that didn't have like an end date, that was just my new normal, quote unquote, forever, it would be different. I would have to think about it differently. But I guess for anyone who's like in school or something that maybe has a bit more of a tangible end, that's like a mindset that can be helpful, even if it's not always the most fun. Like, I think in terms of fulfillment and actually being able to like tick off all the different things that you want to do, I guess that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I know, and I feel like that is really good advice in a way too, where you do need to have an end goal and like something at the end of the tunnel that's like, okay, I am training for this. Like, I'm training for nationals, and like, here are the expectations that I have for myself. And so when you put that like on the calendar and you make up your mind, like, mindset is huge. And you were kind of saying like, I know that I'm going to regret it if I don't just go out and try my hardest. Do you feel like there were people that were inspiring you, or like the Olympics inspiring you, or like other answers to those questions that kind of like made that decision easier for you?
Like, something that I've had a lot of conversations with people about, like my friends and my family, of just like talking about climbing, competing, like what it means to me to compete, what can we do for other people. I think a lot of, like, a few climbers who I've talked to, we've all had similar conversations and perspectives about how privileged we are to just be able to spend so much time and have so much freedom to do something that we're as passionate about as climbing. And to sort of like start making that a job is not something that everyone gets to do. And so how, if you're in that type of position, how can you kind of start thinking about like giving back in a way? And I think that's a tricky one, because I think there's of course like different community things you can do, and there's like you can coach and you can teach, and there's things that you can do. But for me, I think there's always that thing where it's like, kind of, at the end of the day, like it's really because I like it and I like climbing. Like, I climb because I like to climb, and I think there's no point for me in terms of like trying to justify it for any reason other than that. And that's kind of a realization that I've come to, is to say like at the end of the day, I climb for myself, and I climb because I like it. And I'm gonna, in other ways in my life, I'm gonna try to look for ways to help people and be someone who's supportive and like contributes to the world in other ways, whether that's like, I think, in the way you treat people, or maybe in the career you have. But like, the more I think about it, and the more I try to think about what climbing does for myself versus for other people, the more I'm like, it's really like, it's the thing that makes me feel fulfilled and makes me feel like I can express myself and like kind of show this version of myself that I don't get to show otherwise. And that's something that I do for myself. And yeah, I think in terms of people and like events that were inspiring, I think the games were inspiring because ever since I was really young, I was always like, wow, the Olympics are so cool. Like, that's just the coolest thing you can do is go to the Olympics. And I thought that well before I even knew what climbing was. Like, I would be a little kid at recess, just like running around the track at our elementary school and being like being a professional athlete and going to the Olympics is like, that's like the peak. That's the coolest thing you could possibly do. And so I think being there and watching, especially Brooke, who's a super good friend of mine, like watching all of her hard work pay off and to kind of know the work that had to go in physically, obviously, but mentally too, like the types of transformations that had to happen in order to have a good round and really like express yourself at that stage, I think is so inspiring, and it was just like amazing to watch, and it definitely made me want to give it my all and see if there was any part of me that could like give a performance like that at such a high level. So yeah, I would say that was like definitely just watching her be successful there was really, really inspiring and eye-opening.
Other part of this podcast too is like highlighting like women specific things. What has the experience been? I do feel like climbing, since it's hitting the bigger stage very recently. Like it's a new sport hitting the big stage. So I feel like just kind of like that gender equality and like media has been very good at being able to share the spotlight.
I feel lucky that there's nothing like immediately that comes to mind for me in terms of pressing issues in climbing when it comes to like gender equality. What I think makes climbing pretty special and actually really cool to watch is that like you're never comparing. You can't compare like the men and women's fields directly basically ever because we're on different climbs. Like a women's boulder round will not have any of the same boulders that a men's boulder round will have, and same for the lead route. And so you just don't know how the men would perform on the women's boulders and vice versa. And in the like sort of special cases where we'll do like the competition round in a gym, like a cash comp, sometimes they'll have a boulder that's shared for men and women, and oftentimes like the fields can be pretty equal there. Like a lot of on the men's side, they obviously have some skills that are often like much more prominent than the women, but then like vice versa as well. Like you'll have maybe the guys will be super strong on certain types of like really bigger, powerful, more explosive movements, but then on something that's maybe a little more technical and flabbier, like that requires more mobility and flexibility, maybe the women will be better. And that's kind of like pretty typical stereotypes, but there will also be overlap there in terms of there are some girls that will be better on certain power boulders than some of the guys, and same goes for the guys on slab climbs. And I think that's something that's really cool because climbing requires you to have such diverse skills. There's not like clear lines of saying like, okay, the guys are just better at this and whatever. Whereas maybe at certain other sports, it's easier to compare like, okay, if you're like running, for example, like you can say, okay, this is exactly the same distance and the men are whatever percent faster, versus in climbing, like you can't say that. And I think you'd be wrong to try and like make those types of assumptions, which I think is cool and makes for like I've talked to many people who prefer to watch the women's rounds over the men's rounds, and it really comes down to and vice versa. Like I personally like to enjoy or like to watch the men's rounds. So I think it comes down in that sense, more to like what personalities do people like to watch and what kind of styles do people like to see, more than like just focusing on the men's category or the women's category. So I think that's really cool and kind of sets up competition climbing in a pretty unique way in terms of like how it's perceived broadly and like in terms of like how other sports work. And then in terms of like the industry in general, I mean, I think a lot of people can speak to this, but it's hard to be a professional climber. Like there are a lot of people who are really strong and a lot of people who would like to be able to dedicate more of their time to climbing, and financially who are maybe limited, who can't climb as much as they want because financially they are limited and have to seek out like other opportunities in order to be able to make a living and climb alongside that. And there are only like certain amount of sort of spots for people to like be able to sustain themselves from only climbing. And I think that's definitely sad because like everybody wants to be able to make a living doing what they love. So in that sense, like I wish that more people could just comfortably, follow their passion and sustain themselves with that. But at the same time, like I'm not sure what specific changes need to happen to make that more like widely possible.
Yeah, no, totally. It's like only so many people can live that lifestyle. And if you are living that lifestyle, it means that there's also probably other sacrifices that you're giving up in your life too.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that was kind of one thing I wanted to mention, going back to like balancing working full time and training for climbing, is that like people, I think obviously would kind of want to say, yeah, of course you should go for it. Of course you should like try to take your running to the next level. Of course you should keep competing and try to climb the best you can. But I think it's not that simple. Like if you decide to do that, there are other things that you're going to give up, and that other people would be like, hey, you can't give up on like your social life, or you can't give up on, I don't know, taking care of yourself in XYZ way, like having, I don't know, like other things you could be doing that you're now not doing. Like you only can do so much. And so when you choose to like commit more time and energy to something, there are other good things that you're kind of inherently having to put aside or give up on for a while. And that's tricky. Like that's definitely a hard thing.
Definitely. And also just like kind of assessing like what stage of life you're in too, where if you are single and you have a bunch of extra free time and you don't have a crazy demanding job, like that is going to look completely different than like somebody that is like raising a family and has all these other things going on. So yeah, it really is just like picking
that's like
your battles.
100%. Like that's what just came to mind as I was saying that, was like if I was a mom and I was telling you, I think I want to go for it and work full time and then train like 25 hours a week, I would hope that someone in my life could be like, wait a minute, like you have other responsibilities that are very important, and I would urge you to reconsider. So I think absolutely, like these are things that will change throughout our lives, and as long as we're like thinking kind of critically about it, then that's the important part.
What do your next few months look like? I know you're in Switzerland till December, and then are you back in the States for a little bit? Are you like ready to try really hard for World Cup circuit next year? Like what is the next like 6 months timeline look for you? What are the things that are keeping you psyched and stoked?
Yeah, for sure. So the big goal kind of the last few months was to hopefully do well at nationals and kind of set myself up well to be selected for the season next year. And so very happy to report that went well. I went back to the States and was really happy with my climbing at nationals. So that's like kind of feels like a weight off my shoulders for the next few months. And now I'm kind of looking forward to doing a lot of local competitions in the gyms. So I have a bunch of those, like I think 6 or 7 out of the next 9 weekends.
Oh, wow.
I will have a competition like that. Yeah, I just came back from Belgium 2 days ago. I did a competition there, which was super fun. But all of those are really because like I'm not putting any expectation or pressure on myself to do those events. Like I could if I was thinking like, okay, maybe training wise, like it's a good idea, but those are really because I genuinely love doing those, and there are opportunities to see my friends and like climb with big crew of people. So I'm very excited to do those, but very busy with that. And obviously still working here, and that's been going really well and has been very exciting. So it's gotten me thinking about how I want to maybe keep looking into opportunities in this field and keep going with that. So the plan for now, and this might change, is that I'll go back to the States once my internship ends in mid-December, and then I'll be in the US and training for team trials in the spring. And so a lot of training, mostly focusing on climbing. And then hopefully, if all goes well, I'll do the Bouldering World Cup circuit through next summer and like early spring into the summer, and then maybe start a master's program in the fall. And so kind of hopefully keep going on the kind of balancing different school and career opportunities alongside climbing. So those are, I still have to work on the applications and refine exactly what programs and where I'd like to apply. But right now where I'm at is that I would really like to try and keep going with pursuing the two in tandem.
Very exciting, and like from what you've been talking about too, it just seems like that is such a healthy balance for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm excited. A lot of like big changes in the last few years, but I think I'm definitely figuring out how to kind of check all the boxes in terms of like what are my expectations for myself and what I hope to be able to like do in the next few years. And like before it all felt very blurry, and now I feel like I've got my glasses on. I'm seeing a little clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Could still maybe use like a little prescription update, but it's clearer. I'm seeing some shades compared to before, I think.
Who are some of the people in your life right now that you feel like you can really talk to and like kind of, help with that? Like, are your parents a huge part of these conversations?
Yeah.
Is it friends? Is it all of the above?
Definitely. I think a few of my close friends, absolutely, but my parents are definitely the big ones for that one. Like they've always been so incredibly supportive of me and my climbing, but also in kind of as I bounced around with different other like career paths, and like I really couldn't have done a single thing that I've done in the past like few years without their support. And I'm definitely super lucky to be in a position where I can talk to them about these problems and know that they really have, like at the end of the day, they want me to be happy. And I know that everything that all the ways in which they're guiding me is with that in mind. And so that's super helpful. So I always feel like I can lean on them with these types of conversations. But I think what you're doing is really cool to have like to kind of encourage people to talk about that, because it's definitely something that's been tricky for me like in my early 20s, is to kind of be like, there's a whole big world out there, and I don't know like how much do I like work and how much do I go after like these dreams that I have, and like what is appropriate to kind of put aside for now, or like it's there's so many questions, like I can't even articulate it well because it's so like it can be so blurry and fuzzy sometimes. So I think it's cool to kind of open up that discussion.
Yeah, and it can be it's so hard in your early 20s especially, and like, yeah, I feel like being able to just like hear other people's stories just adds such a humanity to it, and it also just makes you realize, oh my gosh, like I'm not the only person going through this. And like it was really cool getting to my sister listen to our first podcast episode. And she's a junior in college right now, and she was like, that was so cool. She was like, I know that like these are all things that like I'm gonna go through, and like, you know, maybe there's somebody out there that like is thinking about like, okay, how do I pursue climbing? Like, is this something that I want to do? And so like getting to hear your story and experience really just like humanizes the whole thing. And I think it's also interesting, like, I mean, like I'm 23 right now, and like even the conversations that I was having with friends this time last year are so different from the conversations that I'm having with people
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
year. And like last year, it was really funny. Like my one friend and I, we get pizza at the same pizza place, like the same time every year. And this time last year, we were talking about like all of the fun things that we were going to do during the year. And both of us were like, we're going to be like going and living in like 5 different places, and, kind of just like doing all the things where it's like, you're trying everything out to see like, what is it that I'm actually interested in? Like, how is it that this is all going to like, be part of my life? And then like, we got pizza this time. We just got pizza this year, and it was like a very different conversation of like, okay, like we tried all of these things. This is great, but also like, how are we actually gonna like, who are the people that like we want to actually become, and what is it this year that we can start to do to like set ourselves up for success in that, and like not let go of some of the dreams that we have, but also be able to have a little bit more of that realistic lens of like, okay, I do need to have like a sustainable sleep routine, and like I need to be able to have some things in life that really ground me, while also being able to, just enjoy everything too.
Yeah, I can totally relate. I've had a lot of like much like quote unquote deeper conversations with all my friends this year than I think in past years. And I feel like really at the end of the day, like if these are kind of the problems that you're grappling with, and if you're like safe and you're healthy, like, and you kind of get to ask yourself these questions and be like, okay, what do I really like? Like, it can feel like a huge deal trying to figure out what your interests are and what you really want to do. But like, if that's the bulk of your problems in the position you're in, like it's going to work out, and things will kind of, the road will, like, things will start to become a lot clearer, and you'll pave the way for yourself. And
definitely.
But I think it is definitely an interesting chapter for a lot of people. And I think overall it's exciting though, because I think it's a lot of like it's almost because there are too many options and there are too many like questions, and that's a much better position to be in than to feel like maybe the other way around. So
definitely.
We'll all work it out. It's gonna be okay.
That is all I have for you today. I am so happy that you stuck around and listened to this episode. It was such a joy to have Chloe on the podcast, and follow along on her Instagram if you do not already. She just posts such fun, inspiring things, and it's just so fun to follow up, especially after you have some of that background story on who she is and what all she's doing. So yeah, stick around and stay tuned for more.